I'm Ben Fazulin. Thanks for joining us. The United States has joined Israel's war on Iran. US President Donald Trump says American Air Force bombers destroyed key Iranian nuclear sites, including the Natanz, Esfahan and Fordo facilities. Iran responded to the attacks by firing a barrage of missiles at Israel. Trump threatened more strikes if Tehran targets US bases.
Despite a self-imposed two-week deadline, the US president decided to attack Iran. He addressed the nation, announcing that the United States had bombed 3 key nuclear sites in Iran: Natanz, Esfahan and Fordo.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised Trump's decision to step into the conflict between Israel and Iran.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do.
Following the US strikes, Iran's top diplomat defended the country's right to a legitimate response in self-defense.
The US administration holds sole and full responsibility for the consequences of its actions, including the Islamic Republic of Iran's right to self-defense.
And let's cross over now to the Pentagon, where a press conference is just getting underway between the US Defense Secretary and Air Force Chief.
As the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs will demonstrate, it was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our Commander-in-Chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program. But it's worth noting the operation did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. For the entirety of his time in office, President Trump has consistently stated for over 10 years that Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. Full stop. Thanks to peace through strength, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. Many presidents have dreamed of delivering the final blow to Iran's nuclear program, and none could until President Trump. The operation President Trump planned was bold and it was brilliant, showing the world that American deterrence is back. When this president speaks, the world should listen, and the U.S. military, we can back it up. The most powerful military the world has ever known. No other country on planet Earth could have conducted the operation that the chairman is going to outline this morning. Not even close. Just like Soleimani found out in the first term, Iran found out when POTUS says 60 days that he seeks peace and negotiation, he means 60 days of peace and negotiation. Otherwise, that nuclear program, that nuclear capability will not exist. He meant it. This is not the previous administration. The President Trump said no nukes. He seeks peace, and Iran should take that path. He sent out a truth last night saying this: any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Signed, the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Iran would be smart to heed those words. He's said it before, and he means it. I want to give recognition to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Joint Staff, General Eric Kurilla at CENTCOM, who did a phenomenal job, he and his staff, all of CENTCOM. Policy across the board, this was a joint effort, and across the Pentagon effort. I want to recognize the pilots who flew those bombers, who flew those fighters, who flew those refuelers, warriors. I want to recognize the sailors on those destroyers, in those subs, on those carriers, warriors, all of them. I want to recognize our soldiers doing air defense, base defense, QRF, warriors, all of them. Every American involved in this operation performed flawlessly. And I want to give recognition to our allies in Israel as well. This is a plan that took months and weeks of positioning and preparation so that we could be ready when the President of the United States called. It took a great deal of precision. It involved misdirection and the highest of operational security. Our B-2s went in and out of downtown Tehran, of these nuclear sites, in and out and back without the world knowing at all. In that way, it was historic. A strike that included the longest B-2 Spirit bomber mission since 2001 and the first operational employment of the MOP, a massive ordnance penetrator. The mission demonstrated to the world the level of joint and allied integration that speak to the strength of our alliance and our joint forces. As President Trump has stated, the United States does not seek war, but let me be clear. We will act swiftly and decisively when our people, our partners, or our interests are threatened. Iran should listen to the President of the United States and know that he means it, every word. I want to give congratulations to our Commander-in-Chief. It was an honor to watch him lead last night and throughout, and to our great American warriors on this successful operation. God bless our troops. God bless America. And we give glory to God for his providence and continue to ask for his protection. I turn it over now to the Chairman for specifics.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for recognizing all of our folks out there doing our nation's work, and nice to see everybody on this early Sunday morning. Last night, on the President's orders, U.S. Central Command, under the command of General Eric Kurilla, executed Operation Midnight Hammer, a deliberate and precise strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. This was a complex and high-risk mission carried out with exceptional skill and discipline by our joint force. I want to thank every service member, planner, operator that made this mission possible. Their actions reflect the highest standards of the United States Armed Forces. This operation was designed to severely degrade Iran's nuclear weapons infrastructure. It was planned and executed across multiple domains and theaters with coordination that reflects our ability to project power globally with speed and precision at the time and place of our nation's choosing. This was a highly classified mission with very few people in Washington knowing the timing or nature of this plan. I'll refer you to the graphic on the side as I walk you through some of the operational details. At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of the plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy, a deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. The main strike package, comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communications. This type of integration is exactly what our joint force does better than anyone else in the world. At approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last night, and just prior to the strike package entering Iran, a U.S. submarine in the Central Command Area of Responsibility launched more than 24 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles against key surface infrastructure targets at Esfahan. As the Operation Midnight Hammer strike package entered Iranian airspace, the U.S. employed several deception tactics, including decoys, as the 4th and 5th generation aircraft pushed out in front of the strike package at high altitude and high speed, sweeping in front of the package for enemy fighters and surface-to-air missile threats. The strike package was supported by U.S. Strategic Command, U.S. Transportation Command, U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Space Command, U.S. Space Force, and U.S. European Command. As the strike package approached Fordo and Natanz, the U.S. protection package employed high-speed suppression weapons to ensure safe passage of the strike package, with fighter assets employing preemptive suppressing fires against any potential Iranian surface-to-air threats. We are currently unaware of any shots fired at the U.S. strike package on the way in. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the President stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran, with the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise throughout the operation. Following weapons release, the Midnight Hammer strike package exited Iranian airspace and the package began its return home. We are unaware of any shots fired at the package on the way out. Iran's fighters did not fly, and it appears that Iran's surface-to-air missile systems did not see us. Throughout the mission, we retained the element of surprise. In total, U.S. forces employed approximately 75 precision-guided weapons during this operation. This included, as the President stated last night, 14 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, marking the first ever operational use of this weapon. I know that battle damage is of great interest. Final battle damage will take some time, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of 4th and 5th generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, as well as hundreds of maintenance and operational professionals. As the Secretary said, this was the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history and the second longest B-2 mission ever flown, exceeded only by those in the days following 9/11. Well prior to the strike, General Kurilla elevated force protection measures across the region, especially in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Our forces remain on high alert and are fully postured to respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks, which would be an incredibly poor choice. We will defend ourselves. The safety of our service members and civilians remains our highest priority. This mission demonstrates the unmatched reach, coordination, and capability of the United States military. In just a matter of weeks, this went from strategic planning to global execution. This operation underscores the unmatched capabilities and global reach of the United States military. As the President clearly said last night, no other military in the world could have done this. I join the President and the Secretary in being incredibly proud of the air crews, naval forces, cyber operators, planners, and support teams, and commanders who made this mission possible. It is their skill, discipline, and teamwork that makes this operation possible. I am particularly proud of our discipline related to operational security, something that was of great concern to the President, the Secretary, General Kurilla, and me, and we will continue to focus on this. As we stand here this morning, many assets are still airborne, and we have hundreds deployed. I ask that we keep our warfighters on their way home and our deployed service member in our thoughts. Our joint force remains ready to defend the United States, our troops, and our interests in the region. Thank you very much.
We will take a few questions, Phil.
Me?
Yeah.
So, is regime change off the table, Mr. Secretary? And to the chairman, you said the battle damage assessment is still ongoing, but do you believe that some nuclear capability in Iran remains?
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The President authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
Thanks for your question. I think BDA is still pending, and it would be way too early for me to comment on what may or may not still be there. But thanks for the question.
Green. No, behind you.
Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, can you tell me, was there a particular moment when the President decided to pull the trigger on this operation where he said, now, rather than being, something in the holster, now we're going to pull the trigger on it?
I would just say, having the opportunity to witness his leadership, he was fully committed to the peace process, wanted a negotiated outcome, gave Iran every single opportunity, and unfortunately was met by stonewalling, which is why he gave them plenty of time to continue to come to the table and give up enrichment, give up the nuclear program. But there was I won't say the particular moment, there was certainly a moment in time where he realized that it had to be a certain action taken in order to minimize the threat to us and our troops. Yeah.
General, you say that General Kurilla increased force protection in Iraq, Syria, and Gulf in those areas. Were they given any advance warning the attacks were coming? And also, Mr. Secretary, when were congressional leaders notified? How long before the attacks took place?
Sure. To your first question, the risk has clearly been rising over the last few weeks in the region. Based on that, and not a particular awareness of this operation, we've made smart decisions to minimize the risk to U.S. forces in the region.
So they were given no advance warning?
No, sir.
In congressional?
They were notified after the planes were safely out. Well, we complied with the notification requirements of the War Powers Act.
After the attacks, they were notified?
They were immediately thereafter. Yes.
Thank you, Secretary. Two quick questions. Do you believe you completely destroyed Iranian nuclear program? And how about Iranian ballistic missiles? Your ally Israel always saying that is biggest threat. And second question is very important. What will be your next step if Iran or militias under Iranian influence in the region attack U.S. interests or allies in the region?
And you can chime in on this too, Mr. Chairman. The battle damage assessment is ongoing, but our initial assessment, as the chairman said, is that all of our precision munitions struck where we wanted them to strike and had the desired effect. which means especially in Fordo, which was the primary target here, we believe we achieved destruction of capabilities there. Ultimately, wherever it may be, whether it's in Iraq or Syria or bases in the Gulf, as the president said, it would be, as the chairman said, it would be a very bad idea for Iran or its proxies to attempt to attack American forces. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Regarding retaliations, Iran and North Korea are cooperating on nuclear and missile development. Do you think there is a possibility that Iran, North Korea, and the other forces, such as China, will join forces to retaliate against the United States?
Well, unfortunately, because of the policies under the previous administration, we drove those countries together, and ultimately that creates a challenging environment. For this particular operation, the focus is on Iran and Iranian nuclear capabilities. That's our focus here, is to not just say that they can't have, but President Trump has said from over 20 years, frankly, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And ultimately, he decided this is the moment, given their stonewalling, when direct military action had to be taken to prevent that from happening. Yes?
Thank you very much. General Caine, I understand OPSEC, I respect OPSEC. Can you say at all what security procedures are being taken to protect U.S. troops in Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East? And Secretary Hegseth, as a global war on terrorism veteran, what do you say to veterans who may be concerned the U.S. is getting into another open-ended war in the Middle East over weapons of mass destruction?
Thanks, sir, for the question. I won't comment on what force protection measures are being taken in the region. What I will say is we're being proactive and not reactive, and being very thoughtful about ensuring that we do all that we can to protect our forces out there.
And I would just say, as the president has directed and made clear, this is most certainly not open-ended. It doesn't mean it limits our ability to respond. We will respond if necessary. The most powerful military in the world is postured and prepared to defend our people. But what the president gave us, as I said, was a focused, powerful, and clear mission on the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities. Those were the targets. That's what was struck. That's what was overwhelming. That's what was overwhelming. That's what the Iranian regime needs to understand, as the president put out last night. He wants peace. There needs to be a negotiated settlement here. We ultimately demonstrated that Iran cannot have a nuclear capability. That is a very clear mission set on this operation. Yes, hold on. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Question for the Secretary and the Chairman. How was this strike coordinated with the Israelis on a strategic level, militarily, and on a tactical level? Was there any direct Israeli military participation in this operation?
Well, I would say certainly Israel had an incredible military success, especially at the beginning and ongoing, in degrading Iranian capabilities, in degrading Iranian launchers, MRBMs. It's been incredible to watch what our ally Israel has been able to do. And there certainly have been conversations. I mean, General Kurilla at CENTCOM has worked closely in the defense of Israel for many years. And part of this operation was the defense of Israel and the ongoing defense of Israel. But as it pertains to this strike, this was U.S. operated and U.S. led.
We took advantage of some of the preparatory work that's been done over the past week and a half in terms of axis of approach. I won't get into the particulars, but as the Secretary said, it was a U.S. strike. We made sure we were not in the same piece of airspace and sky. Aside from that, that was the extent of it.
We'll take a couple more. Yeah, right there.
Question to the Secretary first. Are you concerned whatsoever now about the reaction from U.S. allies given the strike, particularly those in the Gulf? And to the Chairman, if I may, I understand you don't want to speak to specific assets and force protection measures, but do you anticipate at least having to bring in any further assets from other theaters to aid in force protection over the coming days?
We certainly understand the challenges of allies in the region, and we have been respectful and in working in collaboration with them as it pertains to basing and sensitivities there. Ultimately, they've got a lot of assets and people in those locations also where American troops are co-located. So that's a consideration of ours. We've been in close consultation with them, and we appreciate the support that we have got.
Thanks for the question on sort of the global picture. And as you know, that's one of my jobs, is to look globally at the entire range of challenges. We are always carefully considering our force posture around the world and then offering options to the Secretary and to the President. I won't comment on any future things, but the American people should know that we carefully consider those moves around the world and try to modulate as needed our force structure in the region.
Absolutely. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. What communications are being sent to the Iranians right now, and is there any possibility of diplomacy now or in the coming days?
I can only confirm that there are both public and private messages being directly delivered to the Iranians in multiple channels, giving them every opportunity to come to the table. They understand precisely what the American position is, precisely what steps they can take to allow for peace, and we hope they do so. Yes.
The president may not want an open-ended conflict. The Iranians may disagree. Are you prepared for a protracted war?
Well, anything can happen in conflict. We acknowledge that. But the scope of this was intentionally limited. That's the message that we're sending. With the capabilities of the American military nearly unlimited. So Iran, in that sense, has a choice. But we've made it very clear to them, this is nuclear sites, this is nuclear capabilities, this is the line that the president set, and we set that back. Now is the time to come forward for peace. But I think one of the takeaways from this as well is the unprecedented level of ongoing cooperation. I can't speak highly enough of the chairman and his staff and General Kurilla in CENTCOM, what they've done to look around the corner, to pre-position, to understand how an operation like this comes together. The scope and scale of what occurred last night would take the breath away of almost any American if you had an opportunity to watch it in real time. And I think Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America in Missouri overnight, completely undetected, over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud of how this building operated, of the precision, the sensitivity, and the professionalism of the troops involved in this effort. I will take one more. We'll take one more question. Yes, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Concerning the justification for these strikes, in March, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their threat assessment, concluding, quote, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear programs he suspended in 2003, unquote. So what new intelligence does the U.S. have since then that the Iranians have changed their position on nuclear weapons? And does this new intelligence come from U.S. sources and methods, or are we getting this information from other countries?
Well, I would just simply say that the president's made it very clear. He's looked at all of this, all of the intelligence, all of the information, and come to the conclusion that the Iranian nuclear program is a threat, and was willing to take this precision operation to neutralize that threat in order to advance American national interests, reduce the Iranian nuclear program, and obviously collective self-defense of ourselves and our allies. So he looked at all of it, understood the nature of the threat, and took bold action I think the American people would expect in a commander-in-chief. That's all we've got. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, you've been listening to the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth there, and also General Dan Caine, outlining and walking us through what they called a limited precision surprise operation on Iran. Shani Rozanes is here with me to walk us through what she sees as Israel's response to this. We also have Janelle Dumalaon with us, who's been listening carefully to that press conference in Washington. And let's start with you, Janelle. What were the key takeaways from the Defense Secretary's press conference there?
Yeah, Ben, so this was Secretary Pete Hegseth's first briefing, of course, since those strikes started. And he opened with sort of Trump, the person, and how he came to this decision. He reiterated that Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. This is something the president said last night. Many presidents dream of destroying the program, but only Trump could, and only the most powerful military in the world could. So he said again, we will act swiftly and decisively if our interests are threatened, referring, of course, to the threat of Iranian retaliation there. But we also heard a lot of operational details from Dan Caine, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this operation, striking those nuclear sites, was called Operation Midnight Hammer. He said it was a highly classified mission with really only a few people knowing about it in Washington. So remember that there was some reporting of strike packets being sent to the Pacific on Saturday morning. We had all clocked that. He said in this briefing that those were meant to be decoy strike packets in order for the mission to maintain its tactical surprise, while the real strike package quietly proceeded to the east. 18-hour flight to the target area with multiple in-flight refuelings, with the B-2 plane bombers linking up with support aircraft once they were over target airspace. This was all done with minimal communications. The general also said that he was unaware of any shots, whether going in and out, that were fired. So Iran's fighters did not fly. Iran's surface-to-air missiles did not see the American planes. So all targets were hit between 6:40 and 7:05 Eastern Time. And yeah, but I think the most interesting thing that we heard there was this difference between Pete Hegseth, who reiterated the message that the nuclear capabilities of Iran were completely destroyed, while for his part, Dan Caine said that assessment would actually take some time still. So there is already a difference in message there, with the heart of the question being, has Iran retained its nuclear capabilities, and if so, how much?
Hegseth also referred to a psychological impact, saying Iran has been left with no choice. Did he offer any justification for the timing and scope of the strike?
No, and he was asked about this in various forms during that presser. He was asked whether there was a point where President Trump decided to pull the trigger. If you remember, there has been a shift in tone from President Trump in the last days. In the beginning, the administration sort of sought to distance itself in a way from Israel's strikes, saying that they knew about it, but they were not involved. And over the course of the last days, we have seen kind of a shift in position from President Trump as he got closer to calling that strike on Iran sites. So Pete Hegseth really didn't answer that question. He reiterated what Trump has been saying, that his position is that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, that he simply assessed the situation and decided to go for it. He was also asked whether there was new intelligence that suggested that Iran was closer to obtaining a nuclear weapon than previously thought. And once again, Pete Hegseth said that the president had simply been assessing all the reports that out there. He said he has looked at all of this and come to the conclusion that the Iran nuclear program is a threat. So those questions of why now, sort of an open question still at this point.
Thank you, Janelle. Shani, a question to you. What's your main takeaway? We heard a lot of information there about this operation, a lot of praise for Trump. Where does this leave us, this information?
Well, I think for Israeli eyes, or ears, there's two things that we need to keep in mind. The Americans were very careful in not downplaying Israel's role, but also not giving it too much center stage, either for political reasons. You know, Trump is a kind of guy who likes the credit for whatever it is, but also I think strategically it's probably smarter for Israel, even though they might not necessarily appreciate it, in the sense of sort of distancing Israel from that and saying this is a decision Trump has made based on the conclusions. He has made what's right for the self-defense of the states, and he said, the U.S. will operate whenever it feels that its interests, its partners are being jeopardized. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. They did mention that this was banking on the degraded capabilities of Iran that was achieved during the Israeli attacks in the last 8-9 days. So that's one thing. And another thing for Israeli ears to notice is Pete Hegseth very clear emphasis on the fact that this was a focused mission with a very clear mandate to tackle one issue, and that was Iran's nuclear plan. Sort of, in a way, saying, we are not in this with you, Israel, if you're going further down the line of trying to topple the regime, if you're trying, because when we hear Israeli officials talking, they talk about trying to shift focus now after having achieved most of their military goals into attacking more and more institutions connected directly with the regime, weakening the regime. And I think this is where the Americans are drawing the line. We are not getting, drawn into that. We have helped on a very particular topic, which was, as Hegseth is framing it, very close to the president's heart, and he feels that was a threat, a global threat, and of course a threat to America, but we're not necessarily backing you for anything more than that.
OK, but there could be some sort of Iranian retaliation. Janelle, was that addressed by Hegseth?
Yeah, so this is something that there is this popular phrase that is repeated here in Washington, the adversary gets a vote, meaning, of course, an Iranian response is expected in some way. Now, they did not really go into detail as to how they, for example, expect to protect the 40,000 or so troops that are stationed in the Middle East. But, of course, it is expected that the U.S. is positioning advanced capabilities, so bombers, fighters, naval groups being prepared for anything that would happen. So this was also a press conference that was really heavy on the rhetoric. President Trump already said it last night that the outcome will be far more severe if Iran retaliates, far more severe than what has been happening, than what has happened last night. So now, they have said that they have very much a defensive posture in the region. The Americans would have been making a bet that in so doing this, they would be prepared for any Iranian response that could come. The 40,000 troops or so. You have Iranian ballistic missiles. They would be able to target those troops. But so far, we have not heard really any level of operational detail, just that they are prepared in case that happens.
Shani, can I ask you a question? Is there concern in Israel that it would bear the brunt of any sort of retaliation rather than the US?
Well, it's quite clear from this morning that it already is, and it's something that Israel has taken under consideration. It's very much appreciative of the American support and the American decision to step into this, the symbolic meaning behind it is very strong. The message it sends, not just to Iran, but to Israeli adversaries around the world is very strong. But then at the same time, would the Israelis like to see America take a greater lead? I would assume so. But then at the same time, we've seen it with launching this operation, and we'll see it going ahead. It doesn't seem to be what's deterring or stopping Israelis from doing anything. I mean, they're happy and appreciate any support, definitely, from the Americans. But if not, they seem to be very adamant to go their way, no matter what.
Shani Rozanes, thank you very much for your analysis. Janelle Dumalaon in Washington, thanks for chiming in. And let's take you over now to Brussels, where our correspondent Teri Schultz is standing by, having also listened in to this press conference at the Pentagon. Teri, what stood out to you?
Well, I think my colleagues there explained quite well the most remarkable things, the certainty of the Trump administration that it got this highly enriched uranium, that it obliterated, as President Trump said, Iran's ability to make a nuclear weapon. If you read what experts are saying, they believe it's highly likely that Iran actually presumed such a strike may be coming and moved most of the relevant material, the highly enriched uranium, the elements of possibly making a nuclear weapon out of Fordo before such strikes. So as Janelle mentioned, there's certainly more reticence in the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman to be so sure that they did obliterate Iran's ability to make a nuclear weapon, which is, after all, the main concern and was supposedly the main point of the strikes.
What about the European opinion of how they were kept informed about what was going on here?
Just in the last few minutes, the UK has actually come out and said it was informed in advance of the attack. The UK had moved some of its military assets to the region in advance, but says that they were not asked for any help. So it's unclear the precision to which they were informed about when the strikes might take place. But on the other hand, you have the French government, for example, coming out and saying that it had nothing to do with the strikes nor the planning for the strikes. That doesn't exactly clarify whether they were informed, but of course the UK is one of the US's main allies. President Trump and Keir Starmer quite close at the moment. I think President Macron would like to think that he also has a good line to the White House, but unclear at this moment whether France was among those countries which were informed.
And what do you think all that says about the US administration's view of the EU?
Well, one of the other things I noticed in that press conference was that when they spoke about allies, they did not mention European allies, whether they had talked to them, whether they were we're recognizing the possible threat to U.S. allies in the region. That didn't come up at all, and none of the journalists there at the Pentagon asked about it. So we're not exactly sure whether what the U.S. was thinking about the EU and its negotiation attempts there, or where its NATO allies. But you know, as we discussed earlier, President Trump said that there was nothing the EU could do to alter the course of what he was planning at the moment. So that means that he certainly didn't have much hope for talks between the E3, France, Britain, and Germany, and the Iranian foreign minister, which took place in Geneva on Friday. I went back and read through the reports from those diplomats, the foreign ministers, after that meeting, and they seemed actually quite upbeat. There hadn't been a breakthrough with Iran, but they certainly thought that the U.S. was going to give them more time. The reports mentioned that they'd been in direct contact with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So, you know, it appeared that these strikes wouldn't come this soon if you were reading reports from the perspective of the European Union.
And Hegseth said there that Iran has a choice. Is there any way the EU can play some sort of role? Does it have any diplomatic leverage on ensuring that a choice is a diplomatic one?
He did say that this has to be a negotiated settlement now, so we're not sure whether Iran will engage at all, having said now that diplomacy is not an option. But that's the tools that the EU has. And the EU does have communication with Iran. Remember that the EU was the mediator of the Iran nuclear deal, which President Trump withdrew from in his first administration. So they do have regular lines of communication with the Iranian regime, certainly with the Iranian foreign minister, with whom they just met. It's definitely the European Union's highest hope that after this escalation, which is what most of the governments are calling it in their posts on X, that there can be a return to the negotiating table. I mean, today, just hours after the strikes, it's not clear how that's going to happen, if that's going to happen. You have the Iranian foreign minister, on the contrary, flying to Moscow. So I'm certain that the Europeans are using every tool at their disposal to try to bring this back to talks at the table. And there will be a meeting of EU foreign ministers tomorrow where they'll certainly be lining up their views as the EU. And you did have slightly different perspectives on this coming out in reactions. Some of them state first that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon, that is their absolute first priority. Others are saying that there can't be further escalation, that there cannot be a widening of the conflict that can draw in other people and cause more civilian deaths. So tomorrow will be a tough day in the EU meeting room as they try to get all foreign ministers on the same page.
Our Brussels correspondent, Teri Schultz, thank you. And let's bring in Kamran. Matin is Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Sussex in the UK. Welcome. What more is Iran likely to do by way of retaliation, in your opinion?
Well, you know, before actually Israeli attacks, Iranian supreme leader and various officials threatened that any attack by Israel will be retaliated by attacking U.S. bases. In other words, they held U.S. responsible for Israeli action. But more than a week into Israeli attacks, they did not attack American interests in the region. Now that U.S. has joined actually the war, even though American officials, as we saw in the press conference, insist this was a very defined and limited attack. Nevertheless, Iran is in a, if you like, a very difficult situation because on the one hand, it is in their interest that U.S. involvement remains limited as much as possible, because if they join in any sustained way, militarily things become extremely more difficult for Iran. On the other hand, if they do not respond, that projects a image of weakness to the Iranians as well as to Islamic Republic's adversaries, which is not something they like to do. But if they decide to act, I think there are a few ways they could potentially damage or hurt American interests, including using some of their remaining proxies, especially in Iraq, where there are some U.S. bases. Although up to now they had these forces had said they are not interested in getting involved directly, but after U.S. attacks, we have to see whether they are changing their position. The other option, which often is talked about, is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, through which more than 25% of oil and gas is moving. That could have a massive impact on U.S., well, mostly probably European economy, but also global economy. But most importantly, it would actually deprive China from its oil imports from the region. And as you know, China is one of the two strategic partners of Iran, along with Russia. So I'm not entirely sure whether China would agree to such a closure, because it would damage their economy probably more than the Western economies. And finally, whether Iran would try to build actually a nuclear weapon with whatever it has left from its nuclear program after these attacks. But all of these involve massive risks, and we have to see how they weigh their options.
Kamran, what about the damage, though, to Iran? In retaliating, in continuing this war, how could that weaken the regime in Iran?
I mean, if regime change is not on U.S. agenda, then actually, if the Iranian leaders are confident about this, then a prolonged conflict actually might be in their interest, because it will affect the global economy, the price of oil, which would push up inflation in Western economies, something they have been fighting to bring down for years now after the Ukraine's invasion by Russia. But also, for Iran simply to fire a couple of missiles every other day at Israel, it will have huge impact on the day-to-day life in Israel and its economy. Whereas Iran, as a heavily sanctioned country and having experienced war in the past, it might be more, and a much larger country, it might be more easy to absorb the impacts of a prolonged war. And that prolonged war would not be in Trump's interest either, because as we know, he's interested in quick wins, and he has a constituency who is very averse to sustained wars. So all of this, I think, will come into Iranian leadership's calculation as to how to respond. They haven't ruled out, even at this point, returning to diplomacy, but their condition is that Israeli attacks must stop, which I think is, can be seen as an attempt by Iran, even at this stage, to drive a wedge between US and Israel.
Kamran, what about on a personal level? How are Iranians coping with the situation right now? We've heard about the reports, and we've seen the footage of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands, fleeing.
Yes, indeed. As popular protests in Iran have shown over the last decade or so, in which thousands of people were killed and injured, unarmed protesters by Iranian security forces, you can imagine that a lot of Iranian, if not an absolute majority, particularly dislike and even hate Islamic Republic. On the other hand, it's very different to be under threat of bombing from the sky, nowhere to go with limited resources. There is little by way of civil defense provided by the regime. So most people I have talked to at least have mixed feeling on. They are happy to see IRGC commanders or security forces commanders to be taken out by Israel, but there are also lots of civilian casualties. Daily life is being disrupted and so on. But last couple of days, actually, a fear is growing among Iranians, because if the regime survives this war, i.e. it remains intact, especially its security and repressive organs, they might take a huge retaliation from the people. I mean, Iranian state TV openly threatens people, anyone who is remotely seen helping Israel, an accusation they can easily level against people. Then they would crack down on people. And people remember the 1988 mass executions of political prisoners. So people are very afraid of what happens if Iranian regime, comes out intact after this war.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Kamran, Matin, thank you very much for talking to us again here on DW.
Thank you.
In the hours after the US strikes, Iran launched a barrage of missile strikes on Israel in retaliation. DW correspondent Tania Krämer went to a site impacted by those missiles in Tel Aviv. She told me people were expecting the retaliation.
Yeah, that's right. Just a few hours after the US strikes on those nuclear sites, the sirens went off here in the early morning. And here I'm at the site. You don't see actually much because the police closed the area off. They only took the reporters in for a couple of minutes to see the actual damage. Two buildings that were completely destroyed. There were only injuries. Most people there had been either evacuated before, because it was also a home for elderly people, but also people were in their shelters. But that is just right behind me. There's now heavy machinery here clearing the neighboring buildings. And that is another example for one of those missiles that evaded the defense shield here in Israel. The estimates about 40 missiles were fired in this barrage. Sirens went off across all Israel, and there were hits reported in Tel Aviv, in two areas in the center of Israel, and another one also in Haifa, although there were also some of the intercepting shrapnels coming down there.
How are Israelis reacting to the US having joined this war?
Well, I asked some people this morning again, and they're quite supportive. I mean, people had expected that the US would join this. They just said, we thought it might take some more time. So there was quite, some feeling of the proudness as well that the US is now joining this. Of course, there are also some critical voices, because people say, we have to wait and see what actually these strikes, the assessment of the damage to these nuclear sites to see whether this was really successful, whether this will set back the nuclear program, really whether there was destruction. But overall, I think that, people here are supportive of the government's actions, of these attacks on Iran. And while we speak, the Israeli Air Force is still conducting airstrikes, carrying out airstrikes in Iran, obviously. But of course, people are also bracing for the retaliation, because now it's a bit in the unknown. What will happen next? Of course, people would think there will be more of those missile attacks, but there could be also more in terms of that the Iranian proxies in the region might also now join this in a show of solidarity with Iran.
So what are Israelis being told they can expect with Israel increasing the alert level nationwide?
Yeah, it has been increased again. I mean, a week ago, those levels were also on the highest alert, and now then it was relaxed a bit. But now it's back to coming from limited activity, as it said in the guideline, to essential activity, meaning that most of the institutions are closed. Only essential workplaces are allowed to open up, and people should be near shelters, or at least know where the next shelter is. So I think people are bracing here. here to see what's happening next. And that's not just in Israel, by the way. Also, of course, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, in the whole region. We know that also other Arab nations are now on high alert because we don't know exactly how Iran will react to this. There could be also attacks on U.S. military assets in some of the countries, the neighboring countries. So, we don't know where this is going, and this is, what people are waiting for now to see what's going to happen.
The very latest there from DW correspondent Tania Krämer in Tel Aviv. And that brings you up to date on our rolling coverage of the Iran-Israel conflict with the US now involving itself. We'll have more next hour here on DW.